So we are on lesson 9.6 for Algebra 1. Yes, we did skip 9.4 and 9.5, but this is lesson 9.6 for Algebra 1. We're going to look at solving quadratic equations by factoring. So if you guys remember, we did factoring last chapter, so we have to really make sure we remember that. So let's start with our warm-up. It wants us to find the product of the multiplying these binomials together, so we're just going to FOIL. So with our first one, we're going to do our FOIL, our first one. So x squared plus 7x plus 2x plus 14. And then we're going to combine the middle two terms. So we get x squared plus 9x plus 14. Okay, this next one, same thing. We're going to FOIL. So our first term, remember, FOIL is our first. Then our outer. So I did my x squared plus 5x. Then my inner, minus 11x, and then my last, minus 55. I'm going to combine those two middle terms. A negative 11 and a positive 5 become a negative 6x minus 55. Okay, on this one, we need to remember that it's x minus 10 times x minus 10, since it's an x times minus 10 squared. If you remember, there was a trick when I have a square. This makes one of those perfect square binomials where the first term squared and the last term squared we know are going to be 100. And then it's just the middle term doubled, so our inner and outer term. So it's a negative 10x and a negative 10x, which makes a negative 20x. If that's too confusing, just FOIL it. You'll get that answer, I promise. Okay, now we're going to factor the polynomial. So we're going to go back to its factors, back to its binomial factors. So our first term can be split into x and x. We know that for 35, I can do, there's a few options. I can do 5 and 7. That might be the only thing. 1 and 35. So I'm going to actually try 5 and 7 because I know that 5 and 7, if I add them together, I can make 12. So if I have a 5 here and a 7 here, I know that I've got a positive sign here, and I need the same sign, and that sign is a positive. And to check, this makes 5x, this makes 7x, 7x, and 5x makes 12x. So this is the correct factorization. Okay, next one. So I'm going to factor. So we know we need an x and an x. For 63, I'm going to split it up into 7. I know the factors I want are 7 and 9. Because if I subtract 7 from 9, I can get a positive 2 in the middle. So I need this to be the negative and this to be the positive. Okay? On this one, I've got an x and an x again. And I know that I'm going to use, I can either use 4 and 4, 4 times 4. I can use 2 times 8, or 1 times 16. I'm going to use 8 and 2 to make 10. And I know I need the same sign and that it needs to be negative. So negative 8x and negative 2x make a negative 10x. So that one's done. Okay, for this next one, I've got to split this first term up into 2x and x. And then my options for 32, I could have 2 and 16, 1 and 32, 4 and 8. So which ones can I try? Well, I know that if I put an 8 here, I'll have 8x. And if I put a 4 here, 4 times 2 will make 8x as well. And I need 8x and 8x. I need 2 negatives here to make a positive here. So negative 8x and negative 8x make a negative 16x. So really make sure, if you did not understand this on the last test, you need to redo this, okay? Because this is now, we're going to use the same concept in this lesson. So we're going to solve quadratic equations by factoring. You've solved quadratic equations by graphing. We've looked at finding the zeros. And remember, the zero of a function is where it crosses the x-axis. Or, sorry, yes, where, no, the y-axis. Never mind. Pretend I didn't say that. No, don't scan. Postpone, postpone. Sorry, guys. Okay. We're going to look at using something called the zero property, where it tells us the zeros when we have plug 0 in for y. Okay, so these are going to tell us the x values when y is 0. So we know on a graph that we can find the x value when y is 0 by looking where it crosses the y-axis, okay? So in words, if the product of two quantities equals 0, at least one of the quantities has to equal 0. So for example, if 3 times something equals 0, the only way to make it equal 0 is to multiply it by 0. If I have 4 times something equals 0, the only way to make it equal 0 is to multiply it by 4. So basically, in order for something to equal 0 by multiplying them together, one of them has to be 0. So we're going to use the zero product rule to solve the equation, okay? So we know that these two multiplied together have to equal 0. And what we do is we take each part. So we take this first part that's in parentheses, and we set it equal to 0. Then we take the second part, and we set it equal to 0. Because we're saying, okay, when I plug something in there, what will make it 0 in order to multiply it throughout? So when I set it equal, I just solve for what the x value is. So x is equal to 7. If I subtract 2 on this side, I get x is equal to a minus 2. So the way we check if these work is we plug each one in separately. So I'm going to plug the 7 into my x's first. So 7 minus 7 times 7 plus 2. That equals 0 times 9, which 0 times 9 is 0. So we're good. Now I'm going to plug the negative 2 in to the x. So negative 2 minus 7 times negative 2 plus 2. Negative 2 minus 7 is a minus 9, and then a minus 2 plus 2 is a 0. So we want to know, does this equal 0? Well, minus 9 times 0 is 0, so that's good. So our two solutions are negative 2 and 7. Okay, so let's try another one. Sorry, I had to get my dog to stop barking. Okay, so we want to use the zero product property to solve the equation. Oh my goodness, sorry guys. Okay, we're going to try this again. All right, so zero property rule says that we can take each part of this equation and set it equal to 0. So I can take this first part, x minus 2, and set it equal to 0. And I can take this part and set it equal to 0. And then I'm just going to simplify and solve for x. So plus 2, x equals 2. And in this case, I already have x equals 0. Okay, so my solutions are 0 and 2. And if you wanted to check, if I plug 2 into x, I should get 0. 2 minus 2 is 0. 0 times 2 is 0. If I plug 0 in, I know that I will also get 0. So if I plug 0 into x, I'll have 0 minus 2 times 0. And then I know that a minus 2 times 0 is 0. So I'm good. If a quadratic equation is written in standard form, it's not factored already for you, then you may have to factor it first before you can solve for your x's using this zero property rule. So like I said, last chapter, chapter 8, you need to review that if you don't understand it. So here we go. We have a trinomial, and it's already set equal to 0 for us, so we need to factor it. So we need to take x and x, and I need to figure out what numbers multiply to give me 8 and combine to give me negative 6. Well, I need the same sign, and that sign has to be a minus, and I'm going to do a 4 and a 2. 4 times negative 4 times negative 2 gives me positive 8, and I know a negative 4 and a negative 2 equal negative 6. So now I've got all the parts. I'm going to set each part equal to 0 and just solve for x. So x equals 4 and x equals 2. So if you notice, these quadratics have two solutions, and that has something to do with the whole square thing kind of, so I just want you to understand that. So we've got 2 and 4 as our solutions. Okay, let's do this one. So the equation, we have to make sure it's written in standard form first. So we need to move this 21 over to the other side. So I get x squared plus 4x minus 21 equals 0. Then I'm going to factor it. Okay, and I know that I'm going to do a 7 and a 3. I'm going to do a positive 7 and a negative 3, because a negative 3 times a positive 7 equals negative 21, and a positive 7 and a negative 3 make 4x. So now I'm going to take each part and set it equal to 0. So I get x equals -7 and x equals 3. So my solutions are -7 and 3. This is a repeat. Sorry that I put it on the notes twice. Okay, let's try another one. So we need to solve the quadratic. We need to factor first. Everything's already on one side for us in standard form. We've got 0 on the other side. So I'm going to factor. I'm going to do a 6 and a 6. I'm going to do minus and a minus. So I'm going to take x minus 6 and set it equal to 0, x minus 6 and set it equal to 0. So if I add 6, add 6, add 6, add 6, x is equal to 6, x is equal to 6. So if you notice in this case, I have a repeat. So I only really have one solution. Okay, only really one solution. So a helpful hint, if you see something after you factor it that is the same, like x minus 3 times x minus 3, or like on the last example, x minus 6 times x minus 6, you only need to take one of them and set it equal to 0 since they're the same, and you'll only have one solution. Okay, so this next quadratic, we need to get everything on one side so that it equals 0. I'm going to move the 2x over first so that I have 0 equals 2x squared, just because I wanted the 2x to be positive, plus 20x plus 50. Now, before you try to factor, you always want to check if you can pull out a greatest common factor. If you guys notice, I can pull a 2 out of this whole thing. So I can rewrite it as 2x squared plus 10x plus 25. Okay, now I'm going to factor what's left inside. And this is going to be x plus 5 and x plus 5. So I take all my parts and I set them equal to 0. We don't actually have to worry about this since there's no variable in it. We're going to take this one, and we don't even have to take this one since it's the same thing. So x plus 5 equals 0 is the only thing we're going to set equal. I'm going to move the 5 over, so x, the solution is x equals a -5. Okay, last problem, it's just a word problem. The height in feet of a diver, okay, above the water, can be modeled by h of t equals -16t squared plus 8t plus 8. So they're giving you a formula where the height is equal to this over here, and t represents the time in seconds. After the diver jumps off a platform, okay, so he's standing up here. Here's the water. He jumps off a platform. We want to know the time it takes for him to splash into the water. Ooh, there's making a splash, okay? Well, here's our equation. And we know that when the diver hits the water, his height is now 0. He's not above the water anymore. So we can put 0 into h, okay? Now what we can do is we can factor, but we always want to start by factoring out the greatest common factor. I'm going to pull out a -8. If I divide a -8 out of -16, I'm left with a +2 squared. If I take a -8 out of +8, I'm left with a -1t. And if I take a -8 out of +8, I'm left with a -1. Now I'm going to factor this. So I know I need a 2t and a t. And I know I only can do 1 and 1. I got to figure out where the negative sign should go. Since I want the middle to be negative, I need the negative to go with the bigger one. So this is my factored trinomial. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite that. So I've got -0 equals -8, 2t plus 1 times t minus 1. Now I'm going to take all the parts, so this one, and set it equal to 0. And this one, and set it equal to 0. Okay, so then I'm going to move the 1 over. So 2t equals -1. Divide by 2, and t equals -1/2 on this side. This one I'm going to add 1, and t equals 1. Okay, we have two solutions. This is a word problem, though. Let's think about it. They asked, at what time will it take for the diver to reach the water? Can there be 2 times that the diver reaches the water? There cannot. So let's look at this. Can the diver reach the water at -1/2 second? No, we can't have negative time. So this solution doesn't make sense for this problem, okay? So our only solution is 1 second. So yes, on the other ones, we had 2 solutions, you guys, and it's okay to have negatives on these other ones, But if it's a word problem, you need to think about it. Is it possible to get a negative number for these solutions? And that is all. That's all.